I am Stephanie Karzon Abrams. I'm a neuropharmacologist and the founder of Beyond Consulting and Public Secret Records, a music label and artist collective. And Beyond Consulting serves visionary organizations in the integrative medicine, plant and psychedelic medicine spaces, from research to strategy to clinical ops. We do a variety of projects. And I'm the research director at Microdosing Collective. I'm also the clinical director at Modern Medicine Services in LA, which is a clinic that I was hired to launch and stayed on board. It's a psychedelic-informed integrative medicine clinic. I really enjoy writing and public speaking, advocacy work. I got to dip my toe in policy with the Microdosing Collective, and that's been really cool. I guess my mission is bridging science and spirit, being a liaison between the data, both anecdotal and published, and lay people, but also other providers who might not have access to this information, or whether perhaps this information is not even on their radar. So I've made it my mission to be a bit of a science communicator in that way.
And you're speaking at MAPS, which is incredible.
It's really so exciting. Yeah.
And you're speaking tonight at Psychedelic Layout.
Yes.
You got lots on the move.
Yes, I am really enjoying these women's health talks that we've been giving. I think it's really important. And I came at it from a bit of a different lens. I worked in the ICU for a few years, focused on traumatic brain injury and pharmacology. And I noticed that following a brain injury, a lot of women experienced fertility issues and hormone imbalances, and became curious about the treatments that could support them, and realized that it was slim pickings. We've got a lot, but it's not always very effective. So psychedelics could be a promising option, plant medicines as well. And women's transitions can be very complex, so anything to ease those really important phases of life.
Perfect overview. I think you got everything.
Okay, cool.
So I want, the context that I sort of shared with you is so many people, especially at MAPS, are coming in, they're trying to scope the industry, they want to get involved, everybody's super eager. And I'd love to hear now, after working in this industry for many years now, you have a lot of experience. What's your biggest advice to somebody who wants to enter the industry?
Follow your curiosity and follow your passion, but also really put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to meet new people, find people to talk to, reach out on LinkedIn. Sometimes it feels daunting to cold reach out, but I find that the people in this industry are really friendly and open. And so many people have been open to me. I've reached out coldly just to have a conversation, and people have made time for me. I definitely make time for others. And don't be afraid to do projects that maybe won't pay at the beginning. To dip my toe, I started by working in research, and I just wanted to publish. I wanted to do the research, I wanted to publish, I wanted to join a team that I thought was innovative and cool, and I did it for free. And I know we all have bills to pay and we have to make ends meet. So of course, if that, situation works for you, great. But if there's something that you can contribute on a volunteer basis, even if it's small, I think it could be very, very meaningful. And if you're entering a new industry, building your experience and your resume is important. And don't be afraid to also explore, higher education or go back for certifications. And there's so many programs offering certifications these days, and that could be helpful to also meet people, not just expand your knowledge.
Yeah, I was doing an interview before, and she's saying we were agreeing on the fact that the hungry person wins in this industry for sure. Just going at it and not taking no as an answer. So I love that. Okay, my next question. I'd love to hear. I think you kind of spoke to it a bit, but how did you start your career in this industry? Where was it the moment that you really shifted into psychedelics?
So I worked, like I said, in the ICU. Then I took a bit of a left turn and ended up at Johnson & Johnson in medical device, and I had this dual clinical type strategy market development role. So I spent a lot of times with physicians, I spent a lot of time at the hospital, but I also spent a lot of time strategizing and finding educational strategies to grow these physicians' practices and how to make them more efficient and all these things. When I left J&J, it was because I wanted to go back to neuro. I was interested in TBI and how psychedelics could help people with TBI. And funny enough, I was introduced to the Microdosing Collective first. And I met Allie, and Allie, who's the founder of the Microdosing Collective, needed someone to do scientific advisory, research advisory, and then she introduced me to Evan, who was the medical advisor, Dr. Evan Lewis. And so I started there at the same time with the Microdosing Collective and joining Evan's team. And I told Evan, I'll just do research for free. What are we working on? And he had a really cool spinal cord injury research concept question. And we ended up publishing a paper that was a harm reduction paper, but also opened people's eyes to the fact that people with spinal cord injury could really benefit from psychedelic therapies, not just for healing and perhaps rehabilitation, but for the PTSD and other mental health challenges that could come with spinal cord. So that's where it started. And then I was honestly applying to many biotechs, like psychedelic biotechs, and I was getting no over and over again, even though I was very qualified. So you know what? I was like, I'm going to network and find projects that interest me. I'm a pharmacologist. I understand drugs. I did psychedelic assisted therapy trainings from like the molecular pharmacological lens all the way to the actual therapy and prescriber trainings with Theracil, so I could really have more credibility and better understanding. Then I started hosting these dinners so that I could meet people. And these dinners were all about mushrooms. Functional, medicinal, and psychedelic, the whole spectrum. And we invited all kinds of people, newbies to the industry or professionals, people who dedicated their lives to this industry. And some of these, dinner guests ended up being some of my first clients. People with supplement brands that wanted, pharmacological consulting or formulation consulting or research consulting. And then it just kind of snowballed and I started helping clinics. And then I thought to myself, I think I have a consultancy. So I founded Beyond Consulting. It's been...
You do beyond.
Yes,
consulting.
beyond. And I do beyond the consulting. Right. And so it was really an untraditional path, but it's a good path and it keeps evolving and growing. And it's been really, really fun. I get to contribute to a lot of meaningful projects and work with fantastic people. And it's been great, including yourself.
Yeah. I would love to hear, thinking from the career perspective, what are like some common misconceptions you've come across, like maybe with friends or family or the regular person when you share you're in the psychedelic industry, things that come up, and then how you maybe respond to those?
I get this question all the time. So do you get to try the psychedelics? Of course we get to try the psychedelics. I get that question. I get a lot of like, what does that mean? Are you giving psychedelics to people and then are you running the research yourself? And there's so many different ways to do research. Of course, there's clinical trials where you provide an intervention, you provide a drug or a psychedelic medicine. But then there's also observational research, which I find to be really, really helpful to advance research. I almost see them as these jumping off points, pilot studies, proof of concept studies. And they're important because you want to demonstrate that there's a need in a population or there's something happening, right, that's worth studying. So my consultancy often gets commissioned to do a lot of those entry point studies that can then be built on. And one of the misconceptions I get around that is, oh my gosh, that must be so expensive. It must cost like, hundreds of thousands of dollars to run these studies, but it's not true. There's decentralized ways of running these studies for as little as $5 to $10K, and it could really move the needle.
You did that recently, right?
I did that recently. I did that with Ka, which is a Kana supplement brand, and we also designed one for the Microdosing Collective looking at psychedelics and headaches, and we're designing more for women's health, for spinal cord. But another misconception, I think, is that people don't understand the therapeutic side of plant medicine and psychedelics. They just see tripping, they see unintentional practice. And so there's a lot of education, I think, that I have the opportunity to provide and debunk a lot of myths. But harm reduction is also a big part of it. It's not a vibe killer. It's important to keep people safe. And I find myself explaining a lot of how not to use psychedelics, when not to use psychedelics, who should not use psychedelics. And I'm glad people ask those questions.
Yeah, so important. And also I feel like it is the vibe creator. Like there's nothing that kills a vibe more than misusing them and you end up going down a bad path.
Right.
So.
And I also think people tend to lump drugs together and there's just this negative connotation around the word drug. You know what I mean? Like I feel like people just associate drug or drugs with like hard, harmful compounds and molecules. I mean, they're all drugs, right? But then psychedelic drugs are in their own category and they could be, different in certain types of ways. But then, when you think about how psychedelics can be used in recreational settings, right? And they are used in recreational settings. I think that's where there's a lot of misunderstanding. People will wrap, MDMA and psilocybin in with cocaine. That takes a lot of explaining. Yes, you can have a lot of fun and you can experience joy with some of these psychedelics, but that there's this mind expansion, this intentionality, this connectiveness, this awareness that comes with it, that there's a way to use them with intention, even if you are planning to just have fun, and that there are therapeutic benefits that extend far beyond just the happiness and the joy that you get. And I find myself, really, really having to explain the differences between all the drugs and how they can be used.
100%.
Yeah.
Good one. That's a good one. I know there's like an episode with Rick Doblin of a podcast where he explained like recreation versus therapeutic, and it's really just being prepared for whatever comes up, like disrupting your normal. And oftentimes in recreation, that's like you're not prepared. You're just going in, but
Yeah.
you can still do it.
There's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I also think that recreation is therapeutic. So I don't think you need to necessarily be suffering from something to want to experience some of these medicines. And if that's the case, then of course, like you said, prepare yourself and be safe. But that experience can be very refreshing, and that is therapeutic. It's a release that people want to experience. Yeah.
I would love to hear, who was your biggest mentor when you first started? I know you spoke a few names, but like, was there one person, and what was the biggest lesson they taught you?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be Evan, Dr. Evan Lewis. Shout out Evan, and we both know him, which is
that's how we met.
how we met.
Technically.
Yeah.
Shout out Evan.
Shout out Evan. Yeah, such a cheerleader, helpful, kind, knowledgeable person. I'm always learning from him and always enjoying his work, and I admire how he's set up his career, and he keeps going after, innovation and just new ways to help people, and so much growth. It was more like a gift, the way he just welcomed me onto his research team was just a gift, and I appreciate him for seeing me. I felt very seen. And he saw that I had certain skills, that I was willing to develop other skills, that I had a passion, and that we would work well together, and I really appreciate that. I do want to shout out Courtney Barnes, who was a legal advisor to the Microdosing Collective, because she introduced me to Ali, and that really got the ball rolling for me. Like in the spirit of what you're talking about, it only takes one person to open the door and give you an opportunity, and then the rest just follows. And so I think what I learned is that nobody should be afraid to speak what you're seeking to achieve. Like, speak it to people, even if you haven't reached it yet or you're nowhere near it. Tell people what you're interested in and what direction you want to go to, because you never know who they might know. That's how I really got into it. I had one foot still in the medical device lane and the other foot was in psychedelics. I was so interested, and I was like, all right, I'll just get one more medical device job and then I'll hop over to psychedelics. And I remember the day that I was just like, no, I need to go full in. I need to embrace that this is what I want to do, and I need to start talking about it. And I had written so many cool blogs, and I was afraid to put them on LinkedIn. And I was like, I'm coming from a place of science and knowledge, and I'm just going to put it out there. And I spoke to one person and I said, I'm really interested in using my background to serve the psychedelic field. I'm really interested in psilocybin. And that person introduced me to Courtney, and Courtney introduced me to the Microdosing Collective. And so it just takes one, and then
action makes all the difference.
It does. So I just tell people to just speak it out there, put it out there.
I love that. I feel like too, this industry is very much like a mycelium network. So we just like love sharing each other like around and sharing the
True. I think there's good like connection karma.
What do you think are the gaps in the industry? Because we're on a huge mission right now. Global like mental health crisis happening. Psychedelics are kind of growing as an industry to address that. But there's a lot of gaps happening.
There's so many gaps. There's so many for all the amazing things that we're doing. Because I'm about to give a talk on women's health, I'll say there's a huge gap when it comes to understanding women's biochemistry. Up until the 90s, women weren't even necessarily included in clinical trials, and obviously that's changed, but most clinical trials are around the male population. So we need more women, we need more minority groups, we need BIPOC groups. We need to understand how these therapies work in all kinds of people. We can't extrapolate and make generalizations. But going back to women's biochemistry, clinical trials don't factor in if a woman is on hormonal replacement therapy, if they're on contraceptives, where they are in their cycles. And we know that all of this influences not only the psychedelic experience in terms of intensity, but also the clinical effect and therapeutic effect. and the psychological effect. Like a much stronger, more intense journey can affect clinical outcomes. So we need to be factoring in female biology more and taking more time to understand the relationship between, for example, estrogen and serotonin, the differences between men and women. And I can see it advancing. People are starting to publish papers, but I think there needs to be a lot more. And then speaking to the industry, everyone's really gung-ho about opening their clinics, but they don't realize that there's a big gap in education. We are in a bubble. We're at this MAPS conference. Everyone's pretty much bought in, and there's this understanding of the therapeutic potential of all of these medicines, but the general public isn't. The general public hears, scary stories about drugs or just myths, or just a total lack of understanding about how the drugs work. So if you open the doors to your clinic and you haven't done enough education on the front end to your community, not just to potential patients, but also to the referring physicians and providers who will bring you patients, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to open your doors and you might be disappointed.
I want to ask you a final question, and I think this leads in because the word I'm going to use is part of one of your projects. But what aspect of your role, of your career in this industry brings you the most joy?
Oh, these types of conversations, just the opportunity to share with people and also receive new knowledge. Every time I write an article or I step on stage to just share what I know or what I've learned, I see that we're, spreading the message a little further every single time. So that really gives me a lot of joy. I would say that.
Love that.
Yeah, I really like educating. I like the advocacy work because it matters. The work matters.
100%. And how can people find you? Like, what's the best way for them to engage in your work?
If it's for work, beyondconsulting.life. If it's just to check out, me and what I'm up to, my website, Stephanie Karzon Abrams.com, and Instagram. It's just a for fun Instagram, but I definitely share podcasts and different pieces of writing and information, some studies, along with some of my, my own personal posts. And that's Steph K with 2 underscores, Steph 2 underscores K. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, Thank you.